Hello, YouTube. Sir Dragon X here. Today, we continue with episode number 3 of our Relocating to Mexico No Bull series in collaboration with Mexico Relocation Guide. Today, we'll be focusing on renting in Mexico. I'd like to remind you that I will be placing chapter markers so that you can skip around to the subject that you're most interested in. So, let's get started, shall we? Welcome back to Retired Life in Mexico. Today we have episode number 3, which is actually a continuation of episode number 2. In episode number 2, we did purchasing real estate in Mexico. I got a lot of feedback asking questions about actually renting. We actually covered renting at the end, and we're going to continue covering renting today. I have my co-host here, Mexico Relocation Guide, Mariana. How are you doing?
Hola, very good. How are you, Arnie?
Fine, fine. Before we start, I'm going to start up with some housekeeping. I want to remind everybody, and I did in the last video, that we're not real estate experts and we're not financial advisors. Everybody's situation is different, and we're just trying to give you the best advice that we can based on our knowledge and our experience. So let's start with renting in Mexico, what you need to know. The first question I have, Mariana, is, and we kind of touched on it in episode number 2, but what's the advantages of renting versus buying?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's one that maybe a lot of people don't really ask themselves or don't really ask around, right? And there's so many advantages. First of all, if you've never lived in Mexico before, I really recommend that you rent first before buying anything. Now, I know there are situations where you might find your dream home and it may be a great price,
Just like I
and
found
not
my dream
every
home.
Yeah, like you, exactly. That's why I mention it because there are people like you who end up, like you just know that that is going to be your home. But for the majority of you, I would say if possible, definitely rent before you buy. And there's a couple of reasons why. First of all, it gives you the flexibility of being able to leave, right? If you don't like that city, if you don't like that town, if that's not your favorite neighborhood, if that neighborhood has water problems, if it has internet problems, power outages very often, you wouldn't know those things ahead of time unless you actually spend a significant amount of time there. So it gives you the flexibility of being able to actually leave. When you buy a house, it's much harder to just get up and go, right? You have to sell it or rent it out. So flexibility, number one. Number two, if you make it a priority to find a home that's already fully furnished, all you have to do is just move in with your suitcase and your toothbrush. And you just don't have to worry about buying a lot of furniture, which is great for a lot of people who are coming to Mexico to live, you know, they might not know if they want to actually stay in one town versus the other, and they might not know where to get furniture and how, and they might not have all the extra cash to invest in some furniture. And furniture in Mexico, good quality furniture in Mexico can be very expensive.
Yes.
Um,
And I'll use an example. There's a couple from Wisconsin. They moved to Puerto Vallarta thinking that's the place we want to go. And they live in a small town, or they're from a small town in Wisconsin. And one of the things that they said was when they got to Puerto Vallarta is Puerto Vallarta all of a sudden has grown, and there's a lot of traffic and there's a lot of people, and they were used to a small town. And so they literally just rented for 6 months, like you said, decided Puerto Vallarta is not for us, and they ended up in San Miguel. They're now in San Miguel, actually. So
there
this
you
is a
go.
perfect there's a
Well, the
perfect
opposite.
example exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and I hear stories like that so often from not only my customers, but some of our followers who just mentioned that, right? Like they thought that they were going to want to live on the beach. And then they got to the beach and they realized once they started traveling around Mexico and they had no idea that these other towns existed. Once they started exploring and going to these towns, they realized, I really want to actually live here. Like the weather is nicer. I can travel to the beach whenever I want. But day in and day out, I want to be able to live in another part of Mexico. So it just it gives you the flexibility to get up and go. A lot of rentals are available for 6 months and a year. So, it's not like north of the border where you absolutely have to sign something for a year. A lot of rentals can be negotiated into 6 month lease agreements or up to a year, or even more if you want to be able to negotiate your price. So, there's a lot of benefits to renting first before buying.
Now, this brings me to my next questions. And you actually kind of went into it, but what are the different rental options? For example, like you were saying, 6 months, a year, Airbnb. One of the things that I've noticed some people do is they find a place on Airbnb and then negotiate outside of the Airbnb um, to say, I want to stay here for 6 months. I don't want to stay here for a couple of days. Um, what are the different options that you have as far as long term, short term, Airbnb, as far as rentals in Mexico?
Yeah. What I hear from most of our customers and from the real estate agents that we recommend and we work with are most realtors and most landlords, for that matter, are probably not going to find you a place if you're looking for less than 6 months. If you're looking for anything less than 6 months, because maybe you're, like we talked about earlier, maybe you're checking out Puerto Vallarta, but you also want to see San Miguel de Allende. You might also want to see Playa del Carmen or Mexico City or something in between. And you don't want to tie yourself down to a 6 month lease somewhere. In that case, I really recommend Airbnb. Airbnb, again, all of their houses are fully furnished. Most of them have plates, silverware, blankets, right? Pillowcases, towels, everything. So you don't have to stay at a hotel, which can feel less homey and more like you're living out of a suitcase. Um, Airbnb is great. Now, yes, there are a lot of people who end up finding a place on Airbnb, maybe just rent it out for a week, see if they like it. And then after that week, they negotiate with the landlord or the host, right, directly off the platform because Airbnb charges the host anywhere between 20 to 30%. So whatever price you pay is not fully what they get. There are a couple of risks associated with doing that, right? One, you are no longer covered under Airbnb's terms and conditions. So they do have like some guarantees that if something goes wrong with your rental, something like that, they'll reimburse you. Although they'll make the host reimburse you. So you kind of forfeit that guarantee or that
Mhm.
protection you get with Airbnb. But quite honestly, I mean, as long as you have seen the place, you have stayed there, you've talked to the host, you feel like they are trustworthy, I do actually recommend, if at all possible, negotiating with them off the platform and asking them if you can do a month to month or something long term, up to 6 months maybe, while you find your permanent place in that town or in that neighborhood. And that gives you the flexibility to walk around, drive around, hear what the neighborhood sounds like throughout the day, not only in the afternoon, but actually at night. Is it pretty loud? Is it a comfortable sleep? All those things that you wouldn't be able to test before you actually get a rental. Now, for anything other than 3 months, or anything other, sorry, than 6 months, then you can find something long term, which are, you know, there's so many rentals in Mexico, because a lot of people actually rent in Mexico. The ownership ratio of people owning a home to renting is actually more people rent than they own homes because it's not as easy to own a home in Mexico. So long-term rentals are always available, but they go quick because so many people are renting homes in Mexico that whatever you see one week will probably not be available the following week. They go quick.
Exactly. And you know what? You bring up a good point because we did this in the real estate, but one of the things we brought up mortgages, for example, in the United States. I'm just using because I come from the United States. You come from the United States, but we have mortgages. Um, 99%. I held the mortgage on my home for a majority of my life. I had a mortgage. But here in Mexico, it's a little bit different culturally. People actually outright purchase their homes, or even their cars, their vehicles. There's not a lot of options for financing. And it was funny, even when we went in to buy our car, we said, we've got cash. And they looked at us like, yeah, so does everybody else. It wasn't a big deal. We can walk out with a car right now. There's no deal. It was because people tend to save up and purchase, and that's a good point that you bring across, that there's a lot of rentals because people can't afford, or they're renting while they're saving for their dream home, or they buy a piece of property, and then over the years they build little by little. So it works a lot different here in Mexico as far as purchasing real estate. So yes, there's rentals. Now, as far as the options, we were talking about rentals. Um, there are furnished options also, right?
Absolutely. And there's also unfurnished options. So if you would like to bring your furniture from back home, um, which I normally don't recommend if this is your, again, if you're just landing and you're just checking things out and you're not really sure yet, get your footing in first, right? Try to find a furnished place and maybe put things in storage if you're trying to hold on to them. But absolutely, you can find furnished rentals. You can also find unfurnished rentals. Depending on where you're moving to, you'll notice that the inventory is very different in Mexico City, for example, where there aren't that many tourists or that many expats versus somewhere like Puerto Vallarta, where it's very common, right, for a
Hmm.
lot of Canadians and Americans to move to. So in Puerto Vallarta, for example, you'll find a lot of furnished places. In Mexico City or Guadalajara or one of these other, like Monterrey, you'll probably find a
Hmm.
lot of unfurnished apartments and condos.
Yeah, and actually in San Miguel, a lot of them, most of them are furnished because
Yeah,
a lot of people come and they want already the furniture there because there are a lot of not tourists but expats that come to those areas. And for example,
exactly.
Monterrey, like you said, they're mostly unfurnished because they're local people that are renting most of the time. Now,
Exactly.
this brings me up to the next question. And I know that this is kind of a off the beaten path question, but I do know it exists in the United States. But is there, here in Mexico, is there options like to rent to own type options that people offer sometimes?
Definitely. This is usually known as seller financing. And essentially, depending on what you come up with as far as your agreement, I do recommend getting a realtor involved to ensure that, and a realtor that's familiar with Mexican real estate law, right? So somebody preferably who's licensed. But definitely get a realtor involved. It's you can usually finance a home with the owner if the owner wants a lump sum, maybe throughout 8 months or something like that, and then you'll be paying that throughout 8 months or maybe 2 years, 3 years. It depends on what you guys actually agree on. But those are probably less common than somebody wanting to sell the house and receive the cash right away.
And that brings me to, you just mentioned it, a realtor. Um, what's a good way to find rental property in Mexico? Realtor would be one of them. There's also several people that specialize in property management. Um, what's the best way to get in contact, or is there websites that you can go to look for rentals? How do you find a rental here in Mexico other than Airbnb? Of course, you can go to Airbnb and
Yeah.
put in the city you want to go to, but what other options do you have as far as trying to find a rental? Because some people just, okay, I don't know where to look. I don't know where to start.
Yeah. There are a couple of websites that I recommend. The very first thing that I recommend, if you're already in Mexico, is to one, go to the city that you're interested in checking out, right? Possibly do a scouting tour or a scouting trip. That way you get familiar with the different neighborhoods. And then you can actually deep dive into, hey, I really like this neighborhood and I want to spend more time in it. And then I would get an Airbnb for a week or so, 10 days. That way you can get to explore the area and see if you really like that neighborhood or check out other neighborhoods. And then look out for signs that say se renta. Those are usually places that are not posted online. A lot of rentals are not posted online. And I know this is kind of outside of the comfort zone of a lot of people because we're used to looking up everything online and finding out everything ahead of time. But in Mexico, you will find, especially when it comes to rentals, that the best rentals are probably not published online. Because, landlords know they can rent them out and they don't need to spend their money trying to figure out how to publish them online. So visit a neighborhood that you like, spend some time there, and look for signs that say se renta. They usually have a phone number. Now, keep in mind, usually that phone number will be directly the owner, and they may or may not speak English. So, have a friend or somebody who will help you translate to find out what they're looking for, how much they want, what the lease agreement is. Is it furnished? Do they allow pets? Is it 1 story, 2 story? What does it come with, right? If that's not possible for you, if you're still in Canada, the US, or somewhere in Europe, and you're looking ahead of time just to get an idea, I do recommend going to Inmuebles 24. So, and you can put that in the description after
I'll
this
put that
video.
in the
But
description of the video. So I'll put a link to that for
I
sure.
find that that website is the most up to date because there's a lot of websites out there that publish rental listings, and they're usually run by real estate agents, but they never go back and update them when they've been rented, or and you can see there that some things have been published 3 years ago or so, and you can absolutely know that's not up to date. But Inmuebles 24 actually does a really good job of, I guess, filtering, or the people that post on there are actually updating their listings. Another way that I think finding rentals is great if you're doing the research ahead of time is Facebook Marketplace.
Mhm.
So, Facebook Marketplace has a really neat tool where you can go to Facebook Marketplace, type the name of the city, there's a category for rentals, and then you can see what's available and contact that seller directly. And then
And,
what's nice about Facebook Marketplace is the seller has a rating. So you can see if somebody has a really, really poor rating, don't reach out to them.
wow.
If
I,
they don't have any ratings at all, don't reach out to them.
I wasn't even aware of the marketplace. Now, what I was going to mention is there are Facebook groups too that dedicate themselves to, like, you'll see Serrenta San Miguel, and
Yep.
basically people post, I have a place for, and they post the pictures and everything else, and you can message them. So that I wasn't aware of the Facebook marketplace, but I was aware of that there are some groups that handle
Another great way. Yeah, that's
um,
another great.
another great way. Now, as far as finding a professional, like for example, a realtor. And I know you have in your relocation guide, which we'll discuss at the very end, but you do have contacts of realtors. They're not just there for selling property, but they're also there for um, finding you a rental, for example. They take a little bit off from the renter or whatever. Um, but and you have some of these contacts in your guide, and now other than your guide, let's say I just want to call somebody in a rental person or property management, or you see something on Facebook, we rent properties. What's the best thing to look for when you're actually trying to hire somebody that does this for a living? Because you don't want to mess with
Yeah.
looking on the internet, and you just, and a lot of times the commission is paid by the seller, not the seller, but the renter will pay the commission to the realtor. So what's your tips on actually finding somebody to what to
Yeah.
look for?
Yeah, I'm well aware that not everybody's going to buy the online guide. I do recommend it, but I'm well aware that people will want to do their own research, right? And how do you prevent hiring somebody that isn't going to have your best interest at heart? So the very first thing is ask around, right? If you belong to a Facebook group that you trust and you're willing to get a lot of recommendations and do your diligence and actually go through those recommendations, I would ask people in that town who they recommend and why. And then once you do actually get in touch with a realtor or a house hunter, because there's a variety of different services, it's really neat to see how creative people have gotten in the real estate market. But there are house hunters, and house hunters usually are people who will, instead of only working within a certain market of listings that they have, they will get your lifestyle, they will get your budget, your requirements, whether you have pets, maybe you only want a single story home instead of a 2 story, maybe you have a car and you want a garage, things like that. So they'll understand what your needs are and then go out and find houses within these parameters, right? Within these requirements, within your budget to
And
show
some
you.
of them will even send you pictures, like if you're back in the States.
Yeah.
They'll actually send you
Yeah. They do
pictures,
a
or they'll do
walkthrough.
a virtual walkthrough of the place and everything else.
Yeah, so you usually pay them, right? You pay them up front. They all charge different amounts, but they charge anywhere between $100, $200 US dollars, right? So about, you know, 1,000 to 2,000 pesos, 4,000 pesos. And they'll send you, right, a couple of listings, and then they'll help you even come up with a lease agreement. But you deal with that landlord directly, or you deal with that property management company directly, and then you come up with the contract terms.
So
Now
basically, there.
there's also
You go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Now there's also realtors, which realtors usually get paid by the landlord or the property company, a property management company. So you as the customer, the tenant, don't pay. But there's different services. So just be aware, right? When you're researching who you're working with, ask like, do I pay you? How do you get paid? Do you get paid by the landlord? Like, just make sure you have those things up front so there aren't any surprises.
And that's what I.
Two, ask.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. What's the difference? Because you were talking about paying versus someone being paid by the renter. Because I actually prefaced the question with usually the renter pays, but that's my experience in dealing with some property managers. But like you said, there's these businesses that you pay. So that's exactly what
Exactly.
I was trying to clarify when I
Yeah,
when I
and there's just differences, right? Like the reason why you may want to work with a house hunter instead of a realtor is because sometimes a house hunter won't, because they're getting paid up front, right? They will go out of their way or out of their network to try to find you a rental that maybe they won't make any commission on. Whereas a realtor, and it makes sense, right? It's just business. They will probably only work with the rentals that they can make money on, that the landlord is willing to pay them a commission on, or the property management company is willing to pay them a commission on. Makes sense. I mean, they're there to provide a service and they want to get paid for it.
exactly. Now, this brings me to my next question is once you find a place, I mean, how does the leasing work here in Mexico? I think that's one of the biggest concerns because one of the comments was, what's my rights? We're going to go into that. But how does a lease work here in Mexico? Does it work like it does in the United States or Canada or other countries? Um, and so, what's the next step once you find a place?
Yeah, a lease is definitely a contract. It's still a legal contract. You are held to that legal contract, right? So it works like how any lease agreement would work north of the border or pretty much anywhere in the world. It tells you exactly when you need to pay your rent, how many days grace period you might get after that date if in case it needs to be late, what happens if it's late, right? How much you're charged daily. And then, other terms like how many pets are allowed and if there's any deposits left for the pet and what you need to do to get that deposit back. Usually for most rentals, now this obviously depends on the broker that you're working with, the realtor that you're working with, the house hunter that you're working with, or anybody that's helping you out, or what the landlord wants. But usually you pay a deposit and then 1 month's rent upfront.
And
That's how most lease terms go.
and the other thing that I'll add, because I just recently saw a lease contract, and it was a bunch of pages, and literally there was stuff in there that says, if you're arrested for drug trafficking, we hold no responsibility. If you are if you do something criminal, the property's not responsible. There's a lot of clauses in the contracts that I saw that like I'm like, okay, this doesn't that doesn't look like what I'm used to signing in the United States.
Yeah,
But there's a lot of clauses in there, and it's very important that you review all of them. Some of them
absolutely.
you might think are ridiculous, but they're there for a reason. That releases a lot of them release the owner from liability of a lot of things if something happens on the property. People need to
Right.
understand in Mexico, liability can be, it's very different than it is in the United States, but certain things the owner can be held liable for, and they need to make sure they put these things in the contract. So you need to be aware. That's one of the things that's very important.
Yeah. I did a video on like what are the top 10 questions you should ask before renting. And I really encourage people to look at it because one of the things I ask on there that you should ask, or that I really press on that you should ask, is don't assume that the landlord is going to be held responsible for repairs. Ask, what repairs are you responsible for? Maybe it's a certain amount. After that, they're responsible. So you might be held responsible for fixing something as simple as like a ceiling fan because it falls under a certain amount. And then the landlord will be held responsible for the rest. So don't assume anything at all. Just ask, ask, ask. Don't be afraid to ask, by the way. That's what people are there for that are helping you out. If you are going it if you're going directly with the landlord yourself and you guys are coming up with the contract yourself, ask. Don't assume anything because
or
that's
or
what
put it
surprises.
or put it in the contract if you want to make sure that they cover the repairs. If you're working with the landlord off, not off
Exactly.
the books, but you're working with the landlord personally, those things that you're
Exactly.
concerned about, make sure you place them in the contract. That's very, very important. Um,
Exactly.
and that video is on your YouTube channel. Am I correct? Just to make sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I,
It it's
I,
titled something like "Don't rent before asking these questions."
I place a, a link to her YouTube channel, which has been very successful so far. And I do give you a big applause for being that successful. You hit over to 7,000. You surpassed
That's so
me.
nice.
Um, now, one of the things that um, is different, also not different, but this brings me to my next question. What about covering utilities? Because I've heard some rentals include everything, include the internet, include electricity. Some don't. Now, one of the big things with electricity here is it's very hard to connect electricity, for example. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you have to go to CFE. You have to have we'll discuss this in the next episode. The
Yeah,
RFC. There's a lot of things that I just can't go and say I'm renting this property. Like for example, I remember in the United States, I just called the electric company and one would
yeah,
disconnect and you would connect it over the phone.
yeah,
Um, and some places in Mexico, I mean, I collected my electricity over the phone, but they're actually requiring more things now than they did before. So,
yeah.
how do you handle paying those things? For example, electricity, internet, water, for example. I do know people that are renting, and sometimes the landlord takes care of it and then sends you the bill, and you pay them in pesos. How does it work?
Yeah, so that's a great point. A lot of rentals, especially in places where a lot of expats gravitate to, for example, Puerto Vallarta, Ajijic, Chapala, Playa del Carmen, San Miguel de Allende. A lot of these places will say, the rent is 20,000 pesos and it includes water, electricity, internet, and cleaning maybe one times a week, or maybe a gardener one times a week, right? If you have a small garden. But what they might not say is, yes, electricity is included, but up to a certain kilowattage amount. Or yes, internet is included, but it might only be 5 megabytes per second download speed, which is basically nothing. Or, water is included, but anything over this amount, then you're responsible with. So just ask, right, before you actually rent or before you sign the rental agreement, like, what is the actual water allowance? When you're touring the home, ask if you can connect to their Wi-Fi and run a quick internet speed so you actually know what the speed is. The other thing is electricity. Is there a cap? Gas, natural gas, right? Like, is there a cap on gas too? Maybe they're only going to be supplying a certain amount of liters per month, and you might go over that. So and these might not be deal breakers for you. You might be willing to pay for those things out of pocket, but that way there's just no surprises when you actually go to pay your bills. Usually, because the CFE or the electricity bill is hard to transfer into a tenant's or into a renter's name, and it's just not worth the hassle for the owner, then they usually just send you the bill and ask you to pay for it. Now, if you have a debit card in Mexico, you can actually pay it through the app. It's pretty simple. But if you don't have a bank account in Mexico, then you can just pay it at one of the many locations where you can pay your CFE or other utility bills. But usually, yeah, that's how it is. They tell you the bill will arrive at your home, and then you just have to pay for those things on your own.
And one of the things that I'll note about electricity, water, internet, that you had mentioned at the very beginning about allowances. You need to be very, very conscious of these allowances. The reason why is, and I tell everybody the reason why electricity is so cheap here is because the government subsidizes the electricity up to a certain point. After a certain point, you enter a different level of paying. As a matter of fact, a lot of expats get shocked because it's like last month my electricity bill was 500 pesos and this month is 6,000. And what they don't understand is that they went into a different level. Especially this happens a lot in places like Merida, Cancun, the Riviera Maya, where it's hot. You're running the air conditioner all day long, so you end up in a higher electricity rate. So what a lot of times the landlords will do is say, "Well, I'm not going to pay 6,000 pesos because you've been running your air conditioner 24 hours a day, even when you're gone." So they place these caps. Also, internet service can be expensive, so they get the cheapest internet service, and they say internet's included. So, like you said, I think it's very important to ask. And when you start asking, well, why do I have a certain allowance of electricity? Is because literally your bill can jump from 1,000 pesos in a 2 month period to 6,000 without you even realizing it. And
Yeah.
literally your electricity, once you pass a certain point, it's almost 10 times what you're paying for it before you pass this certain amount. So you have to be very, very conscientious of that. And also, if you're going to be paying the electric bill, be conscientious of that also, because you're going to be, you don't be in sticker shock when it went from 1,000 to 6,000 because you've been running the air conditioner 24 hours a day, even when you're gone. Because we do have that habit in our, like I had that habit with central air of just leaving the air
Yeah.
conditioner on all day long.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. Now, the next question, which is related to how do I pay my bills, is how do I pay my rent? Because I know that some people just, here's 6 months up front, or here's the whole year up front. As a matter of fact, I even have a friend before I even moved to Mexico that I worked with, that when he retired, I kept contact with him after he retired, and he would go to San Miguel and say, what if I pay 6 months in advance? Do I get a discount? Or what if I pay a
Yeah.
year in advance? They would give him a discount. He would say, man, they were asking me $1,000 and I got a discount of $700, $300 a month just by paying up front. So how do
Yeah.
you pay your rent as far as, and then also the other question as far as paying the rent is, you know, if you come from another country, you're an expat, a lot of times I only have an American bank account.
Yeah.
How do I pay my rent? Or if you have a Mexican bank account, there's transfers you can do. So how does that work? Paying your rent, just so people will know.
Yeah. I think most landlords prefer cash because, whether we like it or not, there's a lot of landlords in Mexico that probably don't report that as income. So they just, they like the cash payments. And if you are going to be paying cash, you have to, one, find out which is your nearest ATM and find out what is the rate for you to withdraw money from that ATM and how much can you withdraw from that ATM every day, right? Like what's your daily limit? Also, another thing to keep in mind when withdrawing cash from ATMs is avoid the 15th and the 30th of the month because everybody's
Yes.
paying their bills on those days and they're withdrawing a lot of cash. So ATMs tend to run out of cash.
And
So if you,
another thing to note, which we're going to cover in the RFC episode or RFSS or the RFC episode, is that we're probably going to see a lot more of renters actually requiring cash, saying, I don't even want a bank account. And we're going to explain that in the next episode of why. A lot of this has to come down to you having to get your RFC. But we'll explain that in the next episode. But you're probably going to see this a lot more. And also asking for cash. And then also, if you pay up front for 6 months or 12 months, sometimes you can negotiate a cheaper price. Now,
A
I
way
guess.
lower price. Yeah, and you should negotiate that because they're getting a lot of money from you up front. So that should definitely be a negotiation tool. Um, Now, if you obviously don't have, right, six, $7,000 extra to just pay for your rent up front, then you can absolutely pay monthly. That's very common. And cash is king in Mexico. So most landlords will want cash. If for whatever reason you cannot get cash or you just don't feel comfortable, you can always ask about transferring money from your bank account, whether it's in Mexico, to another Mexican bank account. Or you can also use other apps like Remitly or Wise to then transfer money from your American bank account into a Mexican bank account. Now, the thing with that is most Mexican banks will take a commission for accepting money from an external or an international bank, which your landlord will probably not like. So just keep that in mind. I think Remitly is the only app that doesn't charge the person receiving the money any commission.
Wow. And actually, we use TransferWise, but what we do is we don't transfer it to other people. We transfer it to our own Mexican bank account. I
Right.
found that it's very convenient to have a Mexican bank account, um, just to do daily business here in Mexico. The debit card works a lot better. Um, you're going to get better rates. For example, if I use my US debit card, um, they might give me a 19 peso to $1 rate.
Yeah.
Whereas if I transfer money from TransferWise, even though I'm paying a fee, I'm 19.9, 20 pesos that I'm getting into my bank account. And that money can add up. I mean, even though it doesn't seem
Oh, of
like a lot,
course.
and foreign transaction fees. And I think as far as foreign transaction fees, I think Capital One has a very good bank account and credit cards where they don't charge. Some of the banks, and Schwab, I think Charles Schwab is the other one that doesn't
Yeah.
charge.
Capital One and Charles Schwab.
Um, but like I said, and also we're going to cover this in the RFC. You may have some issues trying to get a Mexican bank account on later on. I think it's still up in the air right now, but we're going to go over that in another episode. Now, the next question is, what are your rights as a renter? And then what are the rights of the landlord? Um, kind of, can you go into that as far as your rights? Because I know a lot of people say, I moved into this place, I rented this place, and the landlord doesn't want to fix this. Or I moved into this place and it's noisy and the landlord won't tell the people upstairs or the neighbors to be quiet. What are your rights as a renter? But at the same time, what is the landlord's rights as far as not doing things or telling you what to do if something goes wrong that you come to a disagreement?
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. For starters, ensuring that you're actually renting from the person who has permission to rent the house is key. There are a lot of scams out there where somebody will rent out a house that they know the owner lives somewhere, out of the country or out of that city, doesn't come very often. And it's happened where people rent a house, they get the keys, they move in, and then 3 weeks later, the family shows up like, what are you doing here? So the person that rented the house didn't actually have permission to rent the house. At that point, whatever contract you sign is null, right? Like you do not have permission to rent that house. And you can probably kiss your money goodbye from whatever you paid for a deposit or anything like that. How that person gets the key, that's another story. But just make sure that you watch out for those things. If you're dealing with a landlord directly, or if you're not dealing through a reputable broker or real estate company, then you can always ask for, is the name, if the person's ID matches their escritura or their title, the deed on the house. That's a for sure way that you can ensure that you have permission to rent this place. As far as like what your rights are as a tenant, I recommend, when at all possible, getting a fianza de arrendamiento. And this is a contract that you hire through a third party, usually an insurance company, that basically gives you a policy that protects you as a tenant and protects the landlord. It protects you as a tenant just in case the landlord doesn't want to fix certain big repairs, like maybe your tinaco broke, right? Your water tank reserve broke, and those can be quite expensive, especially right now because I know a lot of people are trying to buy them, and then when supply goes up, then so does the price.
Well, a
Or
lot of
sorry, when
the
demand.
the tinacos are in a lot of demand because of Monterrey's having a water shortage right now. I happen to be in Monterrey, and I'm very aware they're very hard to get a hold of right now, and it's actually
Yeah,
creating a national problem right now.
yeah. So obviously price gouging happens and all these things, and then it's really hard for you to get it repaired. Or maybe you have solar panels, right, on the house, and although that sounded really nice when you were renting it, maybe the battery where things get stored breaks and the landlord doesn't want to fix it. So what ends up happening? That's when I really recommend getting a póliza jurídica or a fianza de arrendamiento, which is basically this insurance policy that covers you. It's a guarantee that if the landlord doesn't meet their end of the lease agreement, then you can actually get out of the lease. And then for the landlord, it's the same thing. If you don't pay your rent, or if you're late, or you make destruction in the house and you don't want to pay it, then it protects them too. So I do recommend everybody get that. I know it's not as common in smaller towns and smaller cities. I know it's common in very big cities because obviously there's more of a rental market. So if at all possible, try to get that. Now, as far as your rights, it's all in your lease agreement. If there isn't an actual repair amount, then that usually means that the landlord is responsible for most repairs. Uh, Now, keep in mind, try to be reasonable, right? If a doorknob breaks, then that's probably something that you're going to have to cover. Your landlord is just not going to make that a priority. So just these kinds of things are good to know. And when in doubt, ask.
And the one thing that I wanted to note about you saying that people sometimes don't have the right to rent the house, and I see this, I actually have seen this in San Miguel de Allende. What you'll have is people will rent a house, for example, for 20,000 pesos a month from an individual, and then they'll put it on Airbnb,
Mm,
and then they'll make, you know, 30,000 a month by putting it on
yeah,
Airbnb because San
they
Miguel is a very
sublet it
popular place.
basically.
So sometimes you have a good point. The person that's renting doesn't even own the house. And there's
Exactly.
a lot of people that do that as investments for passive income. If they can find, for example, a person that owns a house is just trying to get out of it, or not out of it, but they need the income, and they can pay 20,000 pesos, but they can turn around and charge you 30 or 35,
Yeah,
or on the market is for 35. They're making 15,000 pesos a month. So that's
they
one of
pocket
the,
the rest.
exactly. So that is very common in Mexico. Um, Actually, a lot of people that do investments, that's the way they invest their money, is actually doing this. So that's one thing to be aware of, and I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't even think about that until you brought it up. But it's very
Yeah.
common. It's a very common thing here in Mexico. Um,
And that can all be avoided by working with somebody who's well known in the area, who has a good reputation, who has an online presence, who's not afraid to give you references. So if you ask for references and they give you, they give you one or two people and those people never answer, it's probably not a good sign. Just make sure that you actually check references if you've never heard of this person or they don't really have a reputation in the local community.
and this brings me back. We're going to go into kind of scams next, but this brings me back to one quick question that's kind of related. Is what if I want to break my lease? For example, um, I don't know. I found this great place, but then I found out that every Saturday, this happens in my neighborhood in San Miguel, not my neighborhood, but some of the neighborhoods that are, I live in a big complex in San Miguel that has several neighborhoods. And some of those
Mhm.
neighborhoods, it's all Airbnbs. And then they have some long term rentals. But what has happened a lot of times is people will move in not realizing, because in San Miguel, actually, a lot of people think of San Miguel as a tourist trap for foreigners, but it's also a tourist trap for people coming from Mexico City. So a lot of
Yeah.
people from Mexico City rent an Airbnb for the weekend to go partying in San Miguel, and they have these parties at these houses. So what happens is these people, was really nice and quiet until every weekend the noise is out the roof. These people won't be quiet. We have to call security, and they just don't want to deal with it anymore. how do you break? That's the most common thing. Other
Yeah.
things might be I just don't like Puerto Vallarta. I don't like San Miguel. I don't like Monterrey. How do you break your lease? I mean, is there a way to break your lease? And what's the consequences of doing that? Because I know in the United States, you can be held liable for the whole amount of the lease.
Right. Right. Or it could be very hard for you to rent something in the future if you have, you know, a negative mark on your rental history. Yes, you can break your lease. I would, first of all, suggest reaching out to the landlord or the property manager who is handling your lease for you, right? Whoever you signed the rental agreement with, and just talking to them honestly and telling them what's going on, what the situation is. If it can be remedied, then, you know, see if they can remedy it. If it's something like that where your neighbors are being super loud and you, or you're just really disappointed, this is not what you signed up for, you don't really love it, then usually you have 60 days. And that's why they ask for a deposit and then of 1 month's rent, right, up front. Now, usually you'll have to, you'll see that deposit, like you'll kiss that deposit goodbye. You probably won't get it back. And if you have certain things in place, like a póliza jurídica or fianza de arrendamiento, these things can help you out to ensure that you actually get that deposit back. But if you don't, and you did that without this type of policy, then normally you'll be held liable for 60 days or 2 months rent. Until they can find another tenant. Or if the landlord is really nice and allows you to get out of it early, it might just be 1 month's rent.
Perfect, perfect. Now, this
But
is the
yes, you can
last
break your lease.
exactly. And this brings me to the last question, which is really kind of a combination of two, because what we'll do is we'll wrap it up by reviewing best practices when you're looking for a rental. But I think this is a little bit more this is related to that. But what do you look for as far as, we discuss scams, and I've seen this on Facebook groups. There's even individuals where they don't rent from this person. I rented, I sent him a deposit. The property never existed.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's other scams where the person didn't have the permission to rent the property. What are the best practices as far as avoiding those types of scams?
One, work with a reputable person that has a reputation in town. Ask around, right? If you're reaching out to different Facebook groups or you're reaching out to different people locally and asking them if they know about a rental with these characteristics within your budget, and then you magically get 5 or 7 listings delivered straight to your inbox, don't just go by that, right? Like find out who this person is, what is their reputation, ask for references, things like that. Some people are really great con artists, though. Some people have references, some people have an online presence, and then you'll notice that they change their Facebook name quite often. So just run away from those people. But how do you know if they're a con artist? Well, do not give them any money whatsoever until you actually get a lease agreement and keys in your hand. So I've heard of people, unfortunately, right? They're in Canada or they're in the US, and this person's telling them, like, I have 3 other people interested in this rental. They've never even seen the rental. And they're telling them, I have 3 other people interested in this rental. You either pay for it now or I'm going to have to rent it out to somebody else. And that sense of urgency does really get people sometimes. So no, don't rent it sight unseen. Like it's okay. When you get to Mexico, there will be other rentals. Uh, just don't rent sight unseen. If you have somebody locally in the area that can do a walkthrough for you with that rental agent, then ask them if they can go and check it out and make sure that it's legit, that it is actually furnished, that the furniture in there is actually the furniture in the pictures, all those things, right? But the biggest thing is do not give anybody money until you actually have seen the home and have keys in hand. So I've seen people give, 6 months up front, 3 months up front, or 1 month's deposit, 1 month's rent. They're not even in Mexico yet.
And that's one of the main things that I've seen, where people send a deposit because they want to hold it because they're on their way, and then they get there and this person just disappears. They can't even get a hold
Yeah,
of them. So,
exactly.
and I think that wraps it up with best practices is just do your homework. Um, and one of the things that I do have to advise about, you know, I always give this advice, go to Facebook, ask people on Facebook and everything else, but I also issue a warning about Facebook. Um, you have to understand some of these groups. Um, I'm not trying to put them down because I always say visit them, but
Yeah,
the problem that you encounter with Facebook is everybody has a different experience. And it's really funny because you'll ask a question and you'll get about 50 different answers and very
mhm,
opinionated answers. So you have to be very careful when you ask for these. And what I always tell people is when you look at these Facebook groups, you ask a question, try to pick out the answers that pertain to you. And then try to see if you see some consistency in the answers. Because if you see the consistency, you'll see that that's usually the answer when people are getting the same experience. So, one of the things to wrap this up, that's why I recommend places like your individuals like you, Mexico Relocation Guide. One of the things that's very unique about your business is that you actually vet these realtors. You actually vet the people. You actually, if you're going to put a list of recommended realtors or a list of recommended facilitators, you've actually spoken to them. You know they have a reputation. You're not just
exactly,
relying on somebody in Facebook telling you, contact so and so, or you're not relying on
exactly.
on somebody. And so one of the things that I always say is that this Mexico relocation guide is a very, very good resource. I have access to it. I've seen it. Like I said, it's been endorsed by Kuru Paul, who happens to be, like I like I said in my last episode, considered probably, in my mind, the number one informational YouTuber here in Mexico. So, you know, this is legitimate information that's been vetted. And you know what? I don't make any money off of pushing this guide and anything else. I don't make anything. I'm not an affiliate, but I believe in this business because of the integrity, of the business. And this person has that integrity. This person has done her homework. That's what makes this a difference. And yes, does the guide cost money? Yes, it does cost money. But you know what? You're going to get good information. You're going to get accurate information. And like I said, she also offers a lot of free stuff, and she even offers, um, if you remember this guide, not only that, but live sessions with these people, with these realtors, with these people that
Exactly.
actually doctors. So there's a lot of value in what Mexico Relocation Guide does, and that's why I do this show with her. And it's funny. We talked about last episode. You surpassed my subscriber base. But look at who's still sitting here talking to me today, Mexico Relocation Guide. And that's what I talk about when I talk about integrity. That's what I talk about why I don't ask for money, why I don't ask for anything. Because integrity to me really, really, really does matter. And this is a business that has integrity. And so be sure to check it out. If you are on the fence about buying the guide, check out what she has for free. She's got a full YouTube channel. She gives a lot of information for free. I think she's got even a sample guide, a condensed
Mhm.
version of the guide for free. Check out and see for yourself what she has to offer. And I look forward to doing a lot more episodes with you, Mariana. And
Thank you.
and
Too.
I really appreciate you coming on and being here. And stay tuned for our next episode because we're going to cover a very important issue about taxes, actually, in
Mhm.
Mexico in our next episode. So stay tuned for our next episode. Thanks for taking your time out of your busy schedule, Mariana. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you guys for watching.